Hi everyone, I'm David Barroux. I'm Rédacteur en chef, editor-in-chief at Les Echos, the French financial and business daily. Very glad, very happy to be with you live from Paris and with a lot of guests from all around the world for this digital conference. The theme of this session is going to be on resilience strategy, how to build it, mainly in cities. Cities are the core of our development. But to come here today, I came through the streets of Paris. The good news is that COVID is fading slowly. The bad news is that traffic jams are back and that it's getting too hot. And living in a city is both paradise and sometimes a nightmare or difficult. And people in charge in cities are trying to find solutions that will help us live in cities, but in more sustainable cities. To cover this subject, we have a long list of very distinguished guests coming from Paris. This will be my first speaker, Célia Blauel, who I will introduce shortly, but we also have an architect coming from Thailand, who's supposed to join us live from Asia. And then a roundtable with a subject that some of you know already, which is called the Doughnut economy and how Doughnut development can help us build more sustainable cities. And we'll have an economist from Oxford and two people in charge of politics and urban planning in two cities in Europe, Amsterdam and Brussels. So stay with us for a short and very dense program. And I'm very pleased first to start with Célia Blauel. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Célia has been involved in politics for close to 15 years, mainly in Paris. She comes from the Green, Les Verts, Europe Écologie. And she's in charge now since the summer, summer of 2020. She has been in charge in Paris of sustainability, what we call in Paris resilience, and also in terms of the perspective, what is called Paris 2030. What will the city look like a few years, more than 10, slightly less than 10 years from now? But she's also involved in the Seine river, who goes through Paris, and she's also at the board of Eau de Paris, which is in charge of managing the water distribution system in Paris, which is managed partially by the municipality. Célia, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. You're in charge of Prospective, but also in charge of sustainability in Paris. What would you say maybe is, what does this mean for a city like Paris to be in charge of resilience, and what is a goal of a resilient city? And then we will deep in slightly further.
Hello, I'm very happy first to be with all of you. Resilience, sustainability is like a big issue for Paris for many years now. For us, in sum up, it means building, transforming our city to face the 21st century challenges, which would be for us first climate crisis, obviously, because this is threatening the planet, but also our cities. Paris, due to climate change, is facing shocks like heat waves, floods, but also stresses, as we call them, like the scarcity of natural resources, of biodiversity, a threat on our food or energy supply. The second, for us, challenge is the call for solidarity, because as the mayor often says, Paris is the city that is attracting the winners, but also the losers. So now we have to work a lot on social cohesion as well as welcoming the migrants. And then the third thing is the democratic revolution we are experiencing right now. Climate march or the yellow vest that we had in France is a sign for us. We have to reinvent the link between institution, politician, and citizen, civil society. So this is the way. It's our public policy at the cornerstone of these three big challenges, and that means putting into question all our way of life, all our economical tradition and models, and building something new.
How bad would you say is the situation today? How urgent do we need to change? What kind of time frame do we have in front of us? Do we need to act very, very, very fast, or we can also take time to maybe plan and go step by step?
No, I think definitely in cities, planning time is over now. We all have climate action plans, sustainability plan. Cities are the place of implementation and action, and we don't have enough time anymore. So I mean, all the scientific world say we have now 10 years and even less by 2030 to transform radically our territories. So now is the time of implementation. We know our goals, we know our aims, and we have to accelerate on the local level, but also on the national level and European level that we need strongly.
Mm-hmm. What have you done so far? You've been in charge of this program only since last summer, but there were also maybe an involvement in the city before you, so you're not starting from zero. But if you had to maybe pinpoint or mention a few of the initiatives that you took that are already maybe starting to make a difference, where have your priorities be and what have you done so far?
Well, actually, I'm in charge now since 2014 because I was like the climate woman of Anne Hidalgo and also built that first resilient sustainable program. So we achieved quite a lot of things. It's never enough, but what we could, I mean, on 3 fields mainly, we achieved quite a lot of things. First is completely transforming the urbanism of the city. If I have to sum up, because we don't have that much time, it would mean less concrete, less individual vehicles, and more water and more green within the city to adapt the city to the big challenges. And one of the symbolic projects of that is what we have been doing in the transformation of all the schoolyards in Paris that we are now transforming, that they are like fresh areas in the city, as well to as much to adapt that to give children nice places to live in. We also worked a lot on the reducing the threats on our supplies and water, energy, food security for the city. For instance, Paris is the first city since 2020 in Europe to have her own agricultural program, which is not so easy to think about it, Paris having an agriculture experience, but we are now allowed by the European Commission to work with the farmers apart from the European fields to give them subsidies on the long run to change the way they are producing. It's to save our water supplies because 50% of the water supplies of the city comes from underground resources 150 kilometers from the city where the farmers are. But it's also to build on renewing that local food supply that we need for the city, and that is really important for us. And also the third field we worked a lot is how to commit to engage citizens in Paris, because one of the most things that helps resilience, we learned a lot about it in that really sad years that was 2015 with the terror attack. The people of Paris are the first factor, the first element to get resilience. So we work now on what we call the volunteers for Paris, people that are getting trained on many different things, and they are getting from spectators, I would say, to actors in their city, and that helps a lot to build that resilience, that sustainable city, that people get committed to the same goals.
Let me follow up on that last point, the one on the democratic involvement. It's how do you try to involve the citizens before you decide to do something? Do you consider that it's just during the election, people vote for you, and then you know what the program will be because they have chosen you? Or do you also try to have some kind of ongoing discussions on those issues of sustainability throughout the mandate to make sure that the citizens feel involved and not that this transition has been imposed on them?
I would say the two of it, because we are facing a troubled period as well on the democratic level. So I believe strongly in the strength of the vote, of the democracy and of the representative that we are as elected people, and that we have to do what we were elected for. But at the same time, we feel like we have to reinvent the link between the institution and the population of the city. I don't believe that you just have a nice, what we have in France, blue, white, red scarf, and then you are elected and that's it. So we are working a lot to get them committed. It would mean individual citizens in the district by, we had like, for instance, training for emergency situation with the people that they can react, but also giving them a part of the budget of the city to transform the areas that they participate to the city transformation. And every time you have that social link being created, it's really good during crisis time because people know each other and can face it collectively. It's about building the community in the really nicest senses of this word. But also we get to commit big companies of Paris that have been taking climate goals with us. So we're trying to commit every single people from the individuals to the biggest companies, because I think we cannot get to our targets if not everybody is involved. Even if you are like the best municipality ever, and we are obviously, if there is not like a society dynamic, we won't be able to to meet our targets.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that there was also an initiative in Paris when it came to the budget of the cities, that the citizens could maybe vote, that there was not kind of a referendum, but kind of a local initiative, so that they could say we want the money to be spent that way and that way. Was it linked to maybe sustainability goals, or how do you ask the people what they want to be involved in, and is there money that is targeted for sustainability goals was through that initiative?
Yes, that's true. A big part of our investment budget is now in the end of the citizens in Paris. They can propose some projects, and that people of every district votes, and actually what have the most vote is then realized, and they are taking the decision about how we invest the money in their areas, and a big part of the investment budget of the city is now invested like that. So it's the way make people the more and more commit, but also have a global reflection on what is general interest and how we choose this project. And maybe you don't choose the one you propose because there is another one that is more important for the city. So we are now building this for years to change the way we are having the governance of the city, actually.
I live in Paris, and I've witnessed that in Paris, sometimes when you try to make some changes, it also creates local oppositions, or people complain. When I'm driving my car or my scooter, I complain about the traffic jam. When I am on my bicycle, I applaud for the PC Club. But how do you come up with facing the unpopularity that comes up with changes that sometimes you impose on the people? How strong do you have to be to accept some kind of being not popular?
Well, we experienced quite a lot of that during the past year in Paris, especially about, I guess, the issue everybody heard about, which was like the closure to individual cars of the river banks. That was like the first step of that policy. And we were not popular at all for 2 years, I think, at least. I guess this is our job. There is sometimes that you have, of course, to compose and to find a way to do it like the best way for everybody. But the job of politicians today, especially in this really challenging period that we have climate change, that we have tension on the social level, on the economical level, is to set a line and to follow that line. And for us, it was obvious that we were here to tackle climate change, to tackle air pollution, to change the way to support new economical fields like zero carbon emission mobility. And so sometimes you just have to go, I don't know how to say that in English, but just follow the line.
And if you become unpopular in a sense.
Even if it's tomatoes. Yeah, but the Bank River was really interesting because it was really unpopular 2 years, and then the people took over it. And then, they just, they say, well, this is great because we see it, because we have many people on the riverbank, and actually they like it. But it's always times, that is really human, I think. Whatever you do in your life, when you change, even if you change something in your normal life, something little, changing is not that easy. But we are now at the age of the need of a change. This is 21st century. We have big, enormous challenges. We are closing 20th century, the inheritance of the 50s, the way the cities were built, the way we were living. We have to put everything into question to build something new and better, I think, because we're building sustainability. When we do that, we think the city about like today and tomorrow, having a better life today and preserving the planet for the future generations. So this is a big deal, but it's something really enthusiastic and actually getting to a better life. So that's what we have to, that's the job of political leaders, I think.
Célia, thank you very much. Time flew. I had 1 or 2 more questions, but we have to respect the schedule. So we'll have you back next year to see what progress Paris has made on this sustainability agenda. Thank you very much, Célia. We're moving, traveling to the other end of the world. We're in Thailand now. I would say good evening to you. It's good morning, maybe in some part of the world, but it's good evening in Thailand. I'm sorry if I don't know exactly how to pronounce your name. I think it's Kotchakorn Voraakhom. Is this correct?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, okay. Good evening. I'm David. I will be here to ask you a few questions. If I can introduce yourself briefly, I said that you were born and raised in Thailand. You're a landscape architect, but you're also the CEO of something called the Porous City Network. With the goal that you are trying to involve is how to increase urban resilience in Southeast Asia. As I said, you grew up in Bangkok. It's a city of around, I guess, maybe around 10 million people. I've been there one or two times, and it's a very crowded city, very lively, but there's also problems of pollution, congestions, not a lot of green, and sometimes, and also it's a city that is only 1.5 meters above sea level. And with global warming, the rise of the ocean, it's of course one of the cities in the world that is maybe worried about what will be the impact of climate change on a city like that. And I remember only maybe 10 years ago there were big floods in your country. So you're not talking, you're not involved about potential threat, but about a threat that has that also already materialized in the past. And with your background, you're trying to change things. Maybe as a few words of introduction, can you tell us how you think, how urgent the problem is in Southeast Asia when it comes to the future of cities? You have a very vivid demographic expansion, very rapid economical growth. Cities, I guess, are growing very rapidly, and at the same time, you need to change. So what is the problems and what are the potential solutions?
Yes, it's so many problems that we are confronting right now, and correctly that we are one of the city the most at risk, like top 10 in the world. And I just want to focus a little bit on the delta landscape. That's mean like wetlands, swampland, and many of big city in the world, like some part of London, New Orleans, New York, Shanghai, Tokyo, Thailand, Jakarta is actually like that kind of landscape. So we right now kind of cover that landscape with the concrete. So we actually don't think much about water resilience of how the city will live with water. And it's not just the water or the nature that we understand, but it's so much about uncertainty that we are confronting, even with flood, drought, and rain, unexpected rain. And the city is it's a water-based city, but we actually kind of like copy the Western kind of city, like the using road, using cars, and many other like big development, high rise, and things. So I just feel that is really like the problem that we cannot fix, like just rip off the city. So as a landscape architect, I just feel that it's inevitable that the city will stop growing. And I just feel that how can we grow with resilience, with more development that kind of concern with the water, with the public health, with reduce more walkable city, and actually really understand the natural infrastructure of each city and find that solution to confronting with climate change.
But the cities already exist. In a sense, maybe we did the things wrong in the past. We built those cities without taking care of the nature, without noticing what the geography was like. But now the cities are here, and you cannot start from zero all over again. You're not going to scrap Bangkok and rebuild it from nothing. So how can you really start to improve things rapidly and have a meaningful impact?
Definitely, and that's the word resilience, right? Resilience is not about perfect solution. It's about living with change and willing to survive in any circumstance, and also moving forward to go with the positive thinking. So I just feel that this is such an important word for development in right now and in the future. So we kind of rip off the city, but what is left there? What kind of Like in Bangkok, we try to reclaim canal. For 50 years, we thought of it as a sewage way. So right now it's time to really rethink and turn that development and also kind of working with green infrastructure. Of course, I'm not naive going back to like the way we used to be 100 years ago, like natural, like 100%. But how can we regenerate that natural and also find the balance of development and using like the existing infrastructure that's already there, but putting a new programs, putting a new development that turn that negativities to positivities. Yes, you're right. You're correct. So it's got to be like working with
More
what
step
we
by
have.
step, more step by step, yeah.
Yes, definitely. It's not no perfect solution right now. We still need more innovations.
Can you give us a few examples of the initiatives or plans that you already put in place in the city like Bangkok? What have you done yourself? What kinds of solutions have you been able to improve, even if they are not on a huge scale, but they could be used as an example of things that could be done and replicated on a larger scale?
Well, I work a lot, and I think the keyword for my city is porosity, like how the land used to absorb water, reclaiming canal, how the land used to flowing, penetrating with the water and the wind. And I just feel that there's so much waste space in the city that we need to rethink, and especially wetland. Wetland is so important to the climate change. It's absorbed 3 times carbons more than forests. And many of the city need to reclaim their wetland to really protect the sea level rise from the coast and actually create the land that can be more porous. So the green space cannot just be green, but it's actually have to be green with the function that helps city dealing with its water. My work is like designing a park that can be water retention for rain. At this part of the world, the rain is like pouring, and also using like the green roof, the biggest urban farming rooftop in Asia is actually using the green roof, but also slow down the runoff, not to flood the city, but create food for the campus and revitalize many abandoned infrastructure in the city to create a more walkable city. And that's always toward climate change goal to tackle that.
Are you supported by the city? Do you have like a public funding for those kind of initiative, or it's not the private sector or the citizens who actually fund and do this kind of push this kind of movement you're talking about?
Yes, in the Western world, PPP model is working in, like we have a good example, but in my country, the PPP is there, but it's not like very robust at the moment. So I'm actually using whatever like the maintenance cost of the project or whatever we're going to use for building dam or infrastructure that try to protect flood in a wrong direction and turn that into a good solution to the environment, to the public health, and also create the resilience to the city to confront the flood. So I'm actually use the government budget, what already have, and turn to the right solution for now. But PPP is going to be in the future, and I'm sure that the private sector will have more chance on creating a better city with the government.
How high are those topics on the government and the local politicians' agenda when it comes to sustainability, resilience? Is there now in your country a sense of urgency and an involvement in trying to make things go faster?
Well, I have to admit that it's not fast enough. And when we talk about sustainability, it's such a buzzword that you can talk the right things, but you did the wrong thing with like all this great infrastructure. So I just feel that there's so much education that need to put not only just my country on, maybe like all around the region, that when what is the best way, let's say, to protect PM 2.5, maybe government think of, okay, let's buy the machine of air purifier, like millions of them around the city. But what about thinking about planting 1,000,000 trees? Because 5 years later, the budget that go for that machine of air purifier will turn into waste or trash. But if we plant more tree, more sustainability, we actually like grow more solution of PM 2.5 as well. So I think it has to be like a comparison and looking more forward, not just only for the framework of the money that have to be spent, I'm sorry, corruptions and many other things, but provide the right solution. And it's not our city, it's a future city for next generation as well. So the solution have to be not for the short period of time, it should be considered longer than that.
And the citizens, the local population, are they very involved? Do you have a movement of citizens who are willing to follow that path? Or is the priority more economic expansion, urban development without really taking care of the nature, because there is a need for housing and people think that the emergency is more on growth and housing than on sustainability?
It's got to be both, David, because right now all of us are vulnerable to the climate change impact. And there's so much informal settlement that still need a new housing. There are millions of people have to be displaced from the climate impact. So it's like, how can we find a solution that develop and also helping all these issues? And I just feel that we cannot just deprive the solution and the business or the climate change like separately. Right now, it have to be like one basket or in one question that we need to answer all. And I'm sure that many people still focusing on many development that doesn't concern of the climate change, but we have no choice. Yes.
Maybe to finish, we have less than 1 minute, but can you tell us one more word on the rooftop farm initiative that you worked on? How large scale is it, and how far could it go in a city like Bangkok? Is it just a few examples, or can it become really something at scale?
Right now, it's a few examples, and compared to around the world, all these green solutions still a few examples. But I wish and I hope that it will be a norm for us to continue our development. So when I'm designing my Thammasat urban farm rooftop, the biggest one in Asia, I'm actually thinking about the problem of waste space in the city, which is like all this concrete rooftop creating us urban heat island, more energy consuming for the buildings, and PM 2.5. And also the problem of food security. Even we are Thailand, we are like the king of food or whatever country that they all love Thai food, but we actually have a problem of food security. It's not about the shortage, but it's about the quality that we consume so much pesticides that we are like, I'm sorry, the top 5 clients for Monsanto, which is like really bad for the agriculture. So how could that fixing the food problem and also fixing the waste space in the city can be one solution? So that's why I just feel that we cannot just like focusing on one particular problem, because our problem is interconnected. So right now it's about integrative, combining more professions and using the problem to fix many other problems as well. And it's actually, you have to understand the cultural language of design. So I'm using rice terraces, which is like a very smart way of how people used to live with rain, water, the runoff, and grow food from the mountain as part of the buildings. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kotchakorn. Thank you very much. Have a good evening in Thailand, and hope maybe we'll see you live from Paris maybe next year for ChangeNOW, the next edition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Bye.
We're going to move on to our third part of the debate today with a virtual roundtable with guests from Amsterdam, Brussels, and somewhere in England. I forgot if it's live from Oxford, but somewhere in England. As I said, calling all of you by your first name will be easy. Then calling you by your last name, I'm worried. We didn't talk to you, so I'm worried I'm going to make a mistake. So I will call you Kate, who is an English economist, works at the University of Oxford, if I'm right, and who came up with the concept of the Doughnut Economic Action Lab, the deal. And it will be the core of what we're going to talk about for the next 30 minutes, because our two other speakers, Marieke, who is the deputy mayor of the city of Amsterdam, and she's in charge of spatial development and sustainability. She has been in charge of this since 2018. And before that, she was already a councillor at the coming from the Green Party since 2006. And our last guest is Barbara. She's the Secretary of State responsible for economic transition at the city of Brussels. And her background is as a lawyer, but she's also been involved in politics as a Green for several years. What is interesting is that those two cities have been following the concept and the ideas that Kate came up with a few years ago. And I thought maybe Kate, as a short introduction, not a long lecture, but a short introduction, can you tell us what is behind the Doughnut concept? It's very appetizing, but what does it mean, and why is it a solution that has maybe pushed cities to try to follow the principles that you promoted a few years ago?
Thanks, David. It's great to be here. We've inherited economies that assume that the shape of progress is endless growth. The shape of progress in the 20th century, we were told, was this: things grow and grow and grow, and they go through the ceiling. And nobody ever asked what happens when we go through the ceiling. We are experiencing, as Célia was talking about, as Kotchakorn was just talking about, the impacts of climate change and ecological breakdown. We need to transform what we think is the shape of progress. And the Doughnut is one proposition for that. So here's one I have on a stick. The goal here is to leave nobody in the hole in the middle of the Doughnut. That's where people don't have the resources they need for the essentials of life. So ensure everybody has food, water, healthcare, housing, education, political voice, and social equality. But at the same time, do not overshoot this outer ring, because that is where we break down the life-supporting systems of planet Earth. It's how we cause climate breakdown. We acidify the oceans. We create a hole in the ozone layer. As Kotchakorn just said, we use so many pesticides, we actually destroy the web of life. So we need to find balance. It's not endless growth. It's a dynamic balance where we meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And the shape, silly though it might sound, it looks like a donut, but this is what the shape of dynamic balance and health can look like. And it's, as you can imagine, incredibly exciting for me and an honor that people like Marieke and Barbara are putting this into practice in their cities.
It's very catchy. You get the idea very quickly, but you've described the problem. How does the Doughnut practice you try to promote also brings solutions to the problems we're facing?
Right, great point. So what the Doughnut does is set out boundaries. It says there is a social foundation, a boundary below which no human being should fall. And there is an ecological boundary beyond which we cannot go. Now, the amazing thing about boundaries, people sometimes think that boundaries get in the way, they limit me, they frustrate me. No, boundaries unleash our creativity. And it's when we take these boundaries seriously, that is when governments start to have a vision of, okay, how can we thrive in this space in between? What kind of regulation do we need to put in place to unleash that message and unleash that creativity? What kind of policies and incentives and markets and return of the commons do we need to create? How do we create housing that is affordable for all, but does not exacerbate the climate change we're already facing? As Kotchakorn was just saying, how do we provide food for our city that cools the city through green roofs, that doesn't add more pesticide, that doesn't exacerbate the water table problem, as Célia was talking about in Paris? So the Doughnut gives us the boundaries. And I think one of the reasons why it's being picked up by governments, by community organizations, and indeed by companies around the world, is because it doesn't try to tell everybody this is the answer. It would be absurd to try and prescribe an answer for all. What it does is say, here are your boundaries. Now, in your context, in your society, with your values and your history and culture, with your ecosystems, with your government and businesses and possibilities, how can you create solutions that bring us here? And so those answers will be different everywhere. But what I'm seeing and very excited by is that invitation to respect boundaries and to unleash human creativity is being picked up, and it's beginning to happen.
One last question for you. I'll come back to you afterward. But before we move on to our other guests, it's what you're telling us is that you're not trying to push a magical solution, a magic bullet. What you are telling is that you need to change your state of mind, and the way you ask yourself the relevant questions. If I understand you correctly.
Well, first of all, I think there are no magic bullets. I think all bullets are deadly, and I don't want to use any. But I know you're using that metaphorically. There is, of course, no one answer. I mean, that would be absurd. No. And in fact, to be honest, I have absolutely nothing to push. At Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we have never once pushed, lobbied, asked anybody to use these ideas. The reason they're being used is because amazing change makers in governments, in businesses, in communities around the world are seeing this and saying, you know what, that concept helps me bring about the transformation that I already knew I wanted to make, that we already knew we needed to happen. And so this speeds us on our journey. And so it's being adapted and changed and made local everywhere. And it's that peer-to-peer inspiration from place to place, from Amsterdam to Brussels to Copenhagen, to Melbourne, to Costa Rica, to Malaysia, that is what makes it keep on spinning.
Marieke, if I come to the city of Amsterdam, can you tell us when you embraced that idea, why, and what maybe it has changed so far on your roadmap to creating and developing a more sustainable city? And then I will ask the same question to Barbara.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. When I started, and when this government of Amsterdam started in 2018, we acknowledged the enormous responsibility of cities in order to fight climate change. And what I noticed is that we were still very much looking on how can we find technical solutions for this climate change. So actually it was about how can we exchange fossil fuels into biofuels, and then the problem is solved. But of course, the problem is not solved because we are dealing with a structural problem that is actually creating the problems like pollution, like climate change, but also like poverty and inequality by the system that we're using, the system that Kate was talking about, the system of indefinite growth, that we only can, there's no place where we can actually land. We have to keep on growing in order to keep our economy going. And you need another economy. So I thought we need something where actually we acknowledge that what is needed in order to fight climate change is maybe a little bit of technical innovations and a little bit of a technical transition, but mostly it's a social transition. It is about how we want to live on this planet in a way that we can actually make sure that our children, our grandchildren, and many generations after us, together with all the animals and plants, can also live on this planet. And that's something that we have to do. And it's not just by having a technical solutions. The other thing, I think the problem with technical solutions for fighting climate change becomes very eco-elite, what we call. It's very easy to be very sustainable if you have a lot of money, but not everybody can afford a Tesla. Not everybody has the money to buy organic food. We still are living in a system where healthy food is more expensive than not healthy food. So we realized that we needed to change, but I was looking for what is that change? And for me, when I saw the Doughnut, it was like, this is it. I was brought up in times when we were told there's no alternative to neoliberal economies, but there is an answer. And I do think this idea of a Doughnut, of new economies, is an alternative to what we were brought up with. Because actually economy is a social science. It is it's not a natural science like this is the way it is. People make an economy and we can change it if needed. And right now it's very much needed. Mm-hmm. So we had this idea to really embrace the Doughnut. And and to see how we can actually at least start with our circular economy to make that into a donut. And we contacted Kate, and she was happy to work with us, and she made a donut for Amsterdam. So she told us, where are we in this social deficit? Where are we lacking the needed social foundations for the people living in Amsterdam? But also, what is our footprint on the social foundation of people living in other parts of the world? How much labor exploitation goes on with the products that we as people of Amsterdam are buying? And at the same time, what is the ecological footprint of Amsterdam? Mm-hmm. So we were working on that. We were going to launch that idea, and then COVID broke out. And we were, from one day to the other, the world was living in another era. And so we discussed, shall we still launch this? Because everybody's worried about their health, they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about, and we thought, yes, let's launch it right now, because this is the time when it's so clear that change is needed. Because people were mostly thinking about, what is the most important thing in my life? It's my children, it's social inclusion, it's social contact, it's my health. And we can't do that in the way we were doing it. And in a city like Amsterdam, where we saw that social isolation was growing, where we saw that sometimes tourists were taking over the streets of the city and the whole city, and it was economically pushed that we had all these tourists. So there was this need for change. And the funny thing is that it was taken over by so many cities within a few months. So it was not only Amsterdam who had the feeling that COVID is something horrible, but it can be an acceleration for change, because we know that we can't go back to business as usual once we are stepping out of COVID. We have to go back, or we can't go back to normal, because normal was creating all these problems with pollution, climate change, and poverty and inequality. So we needed to do that. So we decided it before, but COVID actually made it sure that we really had to do that, and a lot of people became enthusiastic about it, because it's a government decision to do that. But the people who are actually bringing in donut projects, donut initiatives in the city are people from Amsterdam. So we're supporting them, but most of the initiatives, most of the projects that we're running are run by citizens, by businesses on a local neighborhood level.
Can you give us just a few examples, one or two short examples of what you've really done on the ground in Amsterdam when it comes to this donut transition?
Well, maybe one example is just after COVID, we of course noticed that a lot of children who couldn't go to school didn't have the devices they needed for online education. Poor families who maybe had one laptop in the family, but not 3 for their children. And a lot of poor people who were socially isolated because they couldn't leave the house anymore, and they didn't have any connections anymore. And we started this project where we collected old laptops and devices from the government, but also from individuals and businesses. We refurbished them, and they were refurbished by people who have a distance to the labor market. So we created employment to a group that normally is not, doesn't really have easy access to employment, and we provided them to these families. So we did the ecological part of the donut. We made sure that it was no electronic waste, and at the same time we made sure that people with lower incomes or social difficult situations were also connected to the world in this, and to their families and their schools in these difficult times. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we did was a project which is called Farmers for Neighbors. We did have a lot of farmers in the neighborhood of Amsterdam who couldn't sell their products anymore to the restaurants or to the bigger companies, and we bought those products from them, and we distributed them to the poorer families. And right now, actually, it has become a bigger project where the farmers directly sell their products to people with lower income in Amsterdam. So we also created this system where actually the food, which has been taught to also by Paris and Bangkok, that we tried also to make sure that food is not something you buy in a supermarket, but people have much more connection to their food, which is produced in the neighborhood of their own city.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the last example is not a city example, but I really like it. It's the Johan Cruyff Arena, which is a big football stadium here in Amsterdam. And they are working now with an organic digester. They collect food waste from the whole neighborhood. So both the markets, the restaurants, their own food waste that, of course, as a stadium they have, and they put it in an organic digester, creating biogases that then can be used to heat the houses in the neighborhood, but also to make compost for this smaller ideas on local farming. But also actually for the grass of the football stadium. So actually also the people within the football stadium are connected with those examples of how can you reuse, how can you not make waste, and how can you actually connect a whole area by doing this, because also at this plant where they are is in this organic digester, it's again people with a distance to the labor market that are educated to work in this organic digester, which also shows that there's actually no people with a distance to the labor market. It's just that we have a labor market that is very distant to a lot of people, and that is also something that we hope to change by adopting Doughnut models.
Thank you very much, Marieke. And now the same question to Barbara. When you first started to bite into the donut in a city like Brussels, and what have you done so far when it comes up to the donut approach?
So I could give exactly the same answer as Marieke. So Brussels is a wonderful city like Paris, London, or Bangkok, or Amsterdam, but it's a small city. We have 1.2 million inhabitants. It's a small city also in square kilometer, like we have 160 kilometers, very dense, very diverse, with a high unemployment rates. It's also, as you know, the Belgian capital and also the capital of Europe, and it's at the heart of Europe, not far away from London or Amsterdam or Paris. Mm-hmm. We have very little space for productive activities and a lot of activities in the service sectors like administration, banks, and so on. So we produce actually a lot of wealth, but it's fairly distributed among the Brussels people. And we know that we have an important, huge environmental impact. We know, we already know for a long time that we have a huge impact on the environment. We know that we have to import almost everything we consume within the region, and that living in Brussels has a huge environmental impact. So we need to relocalize the activity within Brussels. And we know we have to create jobs because we have these high unemployment rates. We need to reduce this environmental impacts, and we need to build a more resilient economy, and that's really clear. And it's even clearer since we have had this crisis, this COVID crisis. So knowing this, we knew we had to do something with the economy, and we called it the economic transition. And we knew we had to use new indicators and new tools to assess the economy, and also new tools to define a new direction and new methods. And Kate gave us everything. So with this theory, we had everything we wanted, we needed to do this economic transition. So we had this idea a year ago, so it's not really a really long time ago, and we have just finished the first step of our work. We have presented this week our Doughnut portrait. So we have now our own Brussels Doughnut. But it's only the first step in our journey. It's not the end of the journey, it's only the beginning. We have so new findings, of course, and it's without surprise, our Doughnut has a lot of red points inside the doughnut and outside the doughnut, so we knew it, but it's not a surprise. But we know we have a lot to do. But we also have, and what's really great with this journey is we also have a new method to go further and try to transform these red points into green points in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's too early to talk about real examples because if I understood you correctly, you're just launching you will be launching the second phase sooner or later. But I'm sure that you can learn from the experience of the others from Amsterdam and also other cities. Kate, is the approach at the city level a good thing, or is it maybe too, I don't know what would be the good word, but too egocentric or narcissistic, because cities are part of the problem, but the solution must be more global. So how does the Doughnut also try to involve what is around cities, so that to make sure that it's not everybody tries to solve its own problem on its own, not really trying to open more the borders that you said should not be created? Your microphone. Yeah, sorry, please.
It would be marvelous if the world's governments decided to implement the Doughnut and to profoundly transform international relations. We've been waiting for many, many decades for that to happen. It would be amazing if national governments decided to do this. Of course, that would help. We've been waiting for years for that to happen. The people who seem to be picking it up are at the scale often of the city. They are mayors, they are city councillors, and they are dynamic change makers. And I do think there's something very powerful about the scale of the city. It's a scale where we can see the transformation around us, where we have a chance outside of COVID to meet together in a place where everybody is just a few degrees connected to somebody else, and we can feel the change. In many countries, I think people are more proud to say the city they're part of, and they feel that more strongly than the nation. I certainly feel that in the UK. So I think it's a very dynamic place for experiment. For example, I think it's amazing the work that Brussels are doing, having experimented with bringing communities together to create these beautiful new illustrations of living in the Doughnut. Amsterdam is experimenting with a district, Bijksloterham. It's a circular economy district. What's learned there will become an example for the whole city. What's learned in the city will become an example for the nation. What's learned in the nation, I have no doubt, is very soon going to inspire Europe and beyond. So let's think of cities as brilliant sites of experiment, whether it's circular economy or universal basic income or green roofs. And we can learn from these cities, the leaders who actually lead. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Marieke, for being the kind of leaders the world needs right now in 2021. Oh, I hope there are so many more going to come like you and following, taking inspiration from what you're doing.
If you were to admit that there are some challenges to the model and the approach that you're talking about, Marieke mentioned the fact that the affordability issues, the fact that investing in our future can be costly, and that we have to find solutions that everybody can be paying for, and that we're not excluding people into this transition. Is this one of the challenges you would mention, or what are the main challenges when it comes to the Doughnut approach? And then I will come back for the same questions of what are the challenges you think you will face at the local level in Amsterdam and Brussels.
It's a great question, but I don't think that affordability is the challenge, and I don't think that's what Marieke was implying, because the Doughnut is about both sides. The Doughnut is not just about saying, let's respect the environment and it's going to cost more. No, the Doughnut is about saying, let's leave nobody in the hole in the middle. And often, the unaffordability of life comes down to a question of who owns things. Who owns the housing in our city? Is it multinational investors who only come and stay in it once a year, as in the city of London or many other cities? Or is it the city, like the city of Vienna, which 60% of people live in city-owned and cooperatively owned housing? Who owns the water supply? Who has control over the food supply? I think we are actually reclaiming our cities from multinational corporations in many cases, and from large-scale landowners and investors who only invest because they want a financial return. It's about relocalizing and redemocratizing the ownership of the sources of wealth creation. Who owns the ability to create energy? Who owns the banks? Who owns the housing? Who owns the local businesses? So actually, it's about putting local ownership and affordability back at the heart of the city. That's equally a part of the Doughnut, as is respecting planetary boundaries.
Barbara, what would you say are the main maybe challenges that you came up in this first phase, and or the challenges that you were expecting along the way when you start to advance on this Doughnut journey?
So the biggest challenge this year has been being participative when we can't meet each other. So this has been this year a bit complicated. But I think, as Célia said in the beginning of this session, we have no time to waste. And the time of 2030 is tomorrow. But the time of the politics is really short. So what we really need is to involve the people, the citizens of Brussels or administrations. So they really need to go on. In 3 years, maybe I won't be here anymore. So, but my administration has to go on. So the citizens, the administrations, and the companies, the small, medium, big businesses, they have to go on with the Doughnut, and that's the method Kate wanted to try in Brussels. This participatory method to convince the people, and that's our biggest challenge, I think.
Marieke, in Amsterdam, what is the biggest challenge you would say you will have to face, or you faced so far?
Well, we're facing many challenges. I think one of the challenges is that it remains in projects, because you cannot make the big shift. And as Kate was saying, it's great that cities can take the lead, and I do believe we can set the example on city level. And I don't think it's looking at our own borders. I think it's very much thinking globally, acting locally. So what is needed in the world, you can already do in your city. So we are not waiting for our national government to do something. We're not waiting for the European Commission to do something, but we know we need them. For example, one of the things that is still very much difficult in order to make a circular society is that we have high taxes on employment and low taxes on resources. So it's still cheaper to dig some materials somewhere, resources somewhere in the world, ship them to Amsterdam, polluting the air, making a lot of carbon emissions, and then producing something here, instead of repairing old materials, reusing old materials, recycling old materials, because that brings in a huge amount of employment. So we need these materials and low taxes on employment. And I really need the national government, and especially also the European Commission, to make that happen.
Maybe last question to Kate. How do we go from a very good idea, local implementation, to a critical mass? And how far are we on this critical mass road to a more Doughnut approach globally, would you say?
So the one thing I've learned is that the way to get to critical mass is the power of peer-to-peer inspiration. You know, I could stand on a stage or go on a podcast all I like and say, what if a city did the Doughnut? But it's when Amsterdam says, you know what, we're going to do the Doughnut. That just created a ripple effect across so many cities and places that say, this is a real thing. Now we want to do it too. So it's having leaders like Marieke and Barbara talking about what they're doing. I know that inspires. A schoolgirl inspires a schoolgirl. A mayor inspires a mayor. A teacher inspires a teacher. A progressive business leader inspires another one. That is how we create critical mass. I think also it's by having frameworks that do not impose top-down solutions, but that invite local innovation so that it actually is adapted to the place and owned by the people of that place. But last thing I'll say, you know, in so many other cities where I'm asked to give a talk, they sometimes say, yes, but how do we get started? How do we get started? You know how you get started? You just start. And this is the decade, and we are already late. As Célia said, you know, we're past planning. Implementation, just start. Have the courage, have the guts, have the vision to do it. You will not regret moving fast now.
As a conclusion, Kate, can you tell us how would you say you will be able to measure the fact that we have reached some kind of a success? How do we know that we are? Because in a sense, the media, which I'm a part of, always say it's not enough, you're not doing enough, doomsday is ahead of us, and it creates also a climate of anxiety. But how would you say you can motivate people to say that even if it's a small step, it's a step in the right direction, and success? How do you encourage people and tell them that they're on the right path?
So with this Doughnut, every single one of these dimensions has metrics. We can measure whether we're falling short or overshooting. As Barbara was saying, they've just created the version for Brussels. We have one for Amsterdam. Marieke has often said, let's use this framework to redesign the statistics of our city so that year on year on year, we are monitoring ourselves against this, not always asking ourselves the 20th century question, is our GDP growing? But the 21st century question, are we getting everybody out of the hole? Are we coming back within these planetary boundaries? This must be the measure of success for the future.
Thank you very much to the three of you. Sorry, the debate was very dense, but very interesting, and we've learned a lot. And next time I eat a donut, I'm sure I will think about something else that only the glaze or the sugar on top of it. Thank you very much to all of you, and see you all next year, I hope, in Paris, or live through our technicians, for another session of ChangeNOW, which will continue right now. So stay tuned for another session pretty soon. Thank you very much to all of you.